NBC 16 News at 5:30.
Unrest hit Thurston last night as protesters clashed with Springfield police. Good evening and thank you for joining us. I'm Jacqueline Mazur. Now, we are learning more today about last night after what started as a peaceful march ended in arrests and violence. Our Kelsey Christensen is live outside the Springfield jail with the latest tonight. Kelsey?
Jacqueline, well, one protester still remains inside the jail. The rest have already posted bail, but still protesters question why the barricade was up in the first place. It was a peaceful march until this moment, when police tried to take a Black Unity leader into custody for allegedly defying orders and not turning around.
And as soon as they grabbed him, everything just went chaos.
This Black Unity member was right in the middle of things. She has chosen to remain anonymous for concern of retaliation.
So they were all just grabbing each other's backpacks and trying to yank him back and pull them back into the crowd. And some of them were hitting the officer's hands so that they would let go.
She says a police officer hit her hand with a baton. She says she pulled her arms in, and all she saw next was a fist.
There was an officer that was in front of me that was just throwing punches. He was just throwing jabs.
The officer allegedly hit her in the face, knocking off her glasses.
This is the side where I got hit by the officer. So I'm not sure where the cops got physical with us, but they did.
Sergeant David Grice calls the whole ordeal a safety issue for both police and protesters, especially when he says some demonstrators became violent with police.
I heard people in the crowd saying, we outnumber them, let's just rush through the barriers. And that's a safety issue for us, clearly. And we couldn't allow that to happen.
He says the barricade was put up to keep protesters off Main Street Highway 126 because it's known as one of the deadliest stretches of road in Lane County.
We're trying to protect them from Main Street. We are trying to protect ourselves from being overrun by a hostile group.
This wasn't the only clash of the night. Counter-protesters joined the chaos.
The counter-protesters that came up behind us, we were surprised to see how close they got to us. That's when we turned around and started to try to push them back.
However, there was no police barricade on that side because, according to police, the counter-protesters turned around. One counter-protester was later charged with assault. The Black Unity member we spoke with says she was also maced by a counter-protester, leaving her unsettled with all of the violence and questioning police actions. Now, some of you have been asking why the bail for some of the protesters was higher than the counter-protester. I asked the Springfield police. They tell me that's because the counter-protester only had one charge. That was assault. Jacqueline?
All right, thanks, Kelsey. Well, leaders are discussing the next steps for police reform in Oregon. A joint committee this week in Salem will address things like transparency and use of force, including how police departments handle crowd control. Also on the list of talking points, military equipment and banning chokeholds. At the front of the discussion is State Senator James Manning Jr.
My intent as one of the co-chairs is to make sure that we are providing language and guidance that's going to help set up our law enforcement for success and meet the cries and demands of the public.
Senator Manning also touched on protests that have turned violent, saying the damage being done isn't helping the cause.
Well, I think that in our current climate, where we have peaceful protesting and we have negative forces that are extreme, that are interjecting themselves to distract from the message, is counterproductive.
The last hearing with state officials on police reform will be held tomorrow in Salem. The community is invited to testify. Well, continuing coverage at the federal courthouse in downtown Portland, where Oregon State Police troopers are set to take over duties outside the building. Portland Mayor Ted Wheeler says federal officers will remain inside before some eventually leave. He says agencies agreed they will only use tear gas where there's a risk of serious injury or death.
Step number one is getting the federal officers to leave, and I'm really appreciative of the leadership of the governor working with her federal partners to make that happen, and we're expecting that to start as soon as today.
The mayor says he's cautiously optimistic the federal agents will actually leave.
It has been vetted over and over and over again by community stakeholders. And honestly, the police will never want anyone to hold them accountable other than themselves.
Commissioner Joanne Hardesty says it's time for voters to decide what kind of police oversight they want. City Council approved her ballot proposal, revamping the city's police review board. While continuing coverage on the upcoming school year now, state officials say the coronavirus pandemic showed not all learning is equal when it comes to online education. And now city officials and school leaders are deciding how to level the comprehensive distance learning playing field. Our Lauren Negretti joins us live in the studio tonight with more. Lauren?
That's right, Jacqueline. As state officials pointed out earlier this week, the emergency closures and the switch to online education created problems. And the hope is that a batch of new funding will be able to help solve some of those issues.
The familiar sound of first day of school at Bethel District of years past. Things look different with comprehensive distance learning. Both Bethel and 4J are still working on what the typical school day will look like.
Addressing inequities in online education is really, really important, and it's difficult.
Bethel loaned out more than 2,000 Chromebooks for over 5,400 kids and purchased hotspots to place in the community. McGilvery says there's a group of students they're still working with to make sure have access to their education.
Some of the families that don't have real strong access to the internet and online education, but some of them are families who are experiencing homelessness at this time.
The district will begin with comprehensive distance learning.
Process right now of purchasing more Chromebooks to make sure that we meet the need that is out there.
He says Bethel Online will be more robust in its teacher-facilitated learning.
They almost mirror the in-person schedule and the curriculum as much as possible.
Matching what's at home to what's in the textbook for a smooth transition when students can return to class. It's work that can benefit from a portion of the $28 million Governor Brown is releasing for 5 funding categories, including access, digital content.
This money may be used for mobile hotspots, computers and technology, online curriculum, and teacher training.
A 4J district spokesperson says there are more costs that come with comprehensive distance learning. They plan to have a take-home device for all students and say these funds could be beneficial. Schools are working to ensure students have equal access to education, whether they're in the classroom or on a keyboard.
Oregon Department of Education anticipates those applications for emergency funds will be available August 10th through the 31st. It's for expenses from this July to June 2021. One big question is how many hours a day students will be online for distance learning. The Department of Education has recommendations for different grades, but both Eugene 4J and Bethel districts say the exact numbers are unclear at this point.
All right, Lauren, thanks for the update tonight, Well, the Oregon Health Authority reports 416 new confirmed and presumptive cases and 5 new deaths. Oregon has now surpassed the 18,000 mark in cases and has 316 deaths. Multnomah has the most cases in Oregon with more than 4,200. Now coming up on your only local news at 5:30, a new local nonprofit wants to turn proceeds into permanent housing for the homeless. How the founder hopes to turn it into a nationwide program.
Coming up, how a South Coast pool is making swim lessons work even with the coronavirus guidelines.